so being confronted with history as it really was and people as they really thought makes us ask questions. So why was it up until the late 1700s that everyone regarded slavery as a fact of life? I mean, how on earth could this be? But it's a fact. And so it provokes us to think about, among other things, about how different our situation is from their situation. To some extent, what's moral depends on circumstance. And their circumstances in the late 1700s were very different from ours.
To commemorate the 186th anniversary of the signing of one of New Zealand's key constitutional founding documents, the Treaty of Waitangi, which was signed by over 500 Māori chiefs and Queen Victoria's colonial representative in 1840, I'm releasing a conversation with Oxford University's Emeritus Regius Professor of Moral Theology and a member of the House of Lords, Lord Nigel Biggar, about ethics, empire and colonialism. In New Zealand, the treaty's relevance is still hotly debated. On Waitangi Day in 2026, New Zealand's Leader of the Opposition, Chris Hipkins, and the Deputy Prime Minister, David Seymour, both published widely divergent opinion pieces on the relevance of the treaty to New Zealand's future. Chris Hipkins advocated a collectivist vision for the nation in governing partnership with those of Māori descent, with the Treaty of Waitangi at the heart of his political philosophy. In contrast, David Seymour sees the treaty as promoting individual freedom and equal opportunity for all, and an expression of the adventurous, pioneering and entrepreneurial spirit of New Zealanders past and present. See the links in the show notes for the articles and the treaty itself. In this dialogue, Lord Biggar places empire and colonialism in the historical and ethical context of the age in which they occurred, while taking full account of the many injustices caused by imperial expansion of days gone by. And now I give you Lord Nigel Biggar. Welcome to the Shape of Dialogue, Nigel. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Michael, for having me on the show.
Yeah, well, it's awesome for you to come all the way down from Oxford. I know you're in London already, but it's very much appreciated that you've come here to this beautiful apartment to do this.
Not at all. Well, I enjoyed my visit to New Zealand last November, and we made contact there, so I'm glad to have this chance to reflect on things colonial in New Zealand or whatever.
Yes, it's a very timely subject. Your book seems to be very timely. But can we just get into a bit of your background?
Yeah.
You are, I'll read this, Emeritus Regius Professor of Moral Theology and also Distinguished Scholar in Residence at the University of Oxford. So briefly outline what you do and how you got to that position that you're now in.
Okay, so until just under 3 years ago, Michael, I was a professional academic, and my field was Christian ethics, or moral theology, means the same thing. So I was teaching and doing research in Christian moral tradition, focusing mainly on practical issues. I'd done work on the ethics of making peace and doing justice after civil conflict in Northern Ireland, South Africa. I'd done work on the ethics of war, the ethics of rights, and then I came to the topic of colonialism about 10 years ago, and then produced this book, and it was published in 2023. So my coming to the topic of colonialism was in continuity with my tackling a series of topical, practical issues from a moral point of view. So I'm not a professional historian, I'm a professional ethicist, although my first degree was in history. But I've had a long track record of trying to make moral sense of complicated phenomena, and colonialism is a complicated phenomenon.
Mm. So the title of your book
is Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning.
Yeah, in all good bookstores. and I hear it's done extremely well.
Yes, it was published in early February 2023. A week after it was published, it became a Sunday Times bestseller. It was in the top 10 best-selling non-fiction books. And since then, it's sold between 66 and 70,000 copies.
Which
worldwide.
that's large, isn't it?
It's very large.
Yes, especially for, it's not like you're Stephen King, you're not writing a thriller or something like that.
No, you're talking to an academic, Michael, and we academics, we used to having academic books sell several hundred, maybe a few thousand, but nothing like this.
Why do you think that is? Why is it sold so well?
Well, because I think it's a good book.
It's beautifully written. But there's a bigger issue at hand, isn't there? There's obviously an interest.
Yes, no, there is. There is.
I mean, if you'd written it 50 years ago, maybe it wouldn't have been such the same interest.
If I'd written it 10 years ago, there wouldn't have been such interest, frankly. No, it's because the topic of colonial history in my country, in Britain, in your country, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, and indeed in the United States, has become politically potent particularly in the last 5 years or so. So institutions are subject to calls for decolonization. And so that's why it's a topical topic. And I intuited that about 10 years ago, actually, during the referendum in Scotland on whether Scotland should become independent of the UK, because in spite of my accent, I'm in fact Scottish.
You're Scottish, yeah. Scottish parents.
Scottish father, English mother, born in Scotland, educated in Scotland, England. That's why I sound English.
But your heart's in Scotland. Yeah.
So, well, if you get me into a pulpit or get me slightly drunk and make me say the word Jerusalem, it comes out occasionally. But the relevance of that is that in the during the campaign about whether Scotland should become independent or not in 2014, although an instinctive anti-independence person, instinctively pro-UK, I felt morally obliged to look at arguments that Scottish nationals were making for Scotland's secession from the United Kingdom. And one argument I came across can be distilled into this equation. Britain equals empire equals evil. Therefore, Scotland needs to separate itself from this morally compromised post-imperial entity called Britain and sail off into a bright new shiny sin-free future. But I've been reading imperial history, British imperial history off and on for 20 years, and I knew that the simple equation empire equals evil is just not historically tenable. But Michael, that was when, in 2014, I first realized that colonial history was being used for political purposes that I regarded as destructive. And I thought then someone needs to correct the record.
Right. Well, let's talk about that later. Want to just define a few terms. Well, one in particular. What are ethics?
So ethics is a branch of philosophy or theology that focuses on what's good and what's bad, what's valuable, what's not valuable, what's right and what's wrong, what are the principles and what are the rules. So it deals with questions of right and wrong, basically.
And how do you find what's right and wrong? I know that's a sort of a ridiculous question, but
it's a big question.
It's sort of an obvious question, but it is an interesting question.
Yeah. Well, I think my view is that although human beings evolved, and there may have been a time when all that we cared about was surviving. We've evolved into creatures who actually care about a whole range of things now. We don't just care about survival. We also care about things like justice and beauty. Now, as to why we've evolved into those kind of creatures is a very big question, but we have. So it's not true to say that when push comes to shove, all we care about is survival, because actually some of us will sacrifice our lives for justice. So clearly we care about a wider range of things.
Or for king and country.
King and country,
yeah,
absolutely. And of course, and the advocates of decolonization are obsessed with social justice. We do in fact have certain values. Now, yes, across different cultures you'll find different permutations, But I think actually all human societies, you will find people value the same kinds of things. They'll have some concept of beauty. Social stability is important.
Sorry, what?
Social stability.
Yeah, right.
Social stability is important, but also punishing wrongdoing is important, or some kind of concept of fairness. And different cultures will take these in different directions, but you can still see common principles there.
But also within one culture, say the European cultures,
Yeah.
the difference between our ethics now and our ethics in the Middle Ages.
Sure.
Or the ethics in Roman times.
Yeah.
You know.
But I still say, my view is, yes, of course, there's always been plurality and diversity. Always has been that. Even in medieval societies, not everyone believed the same thing. But when we go back to ancient Greece or Rome, we don't enter entirely different moral worlds. We can recognize what's going on there because some of the things that Romans and ancient Romans and Greeks valued, we too recognize. And indeed, if we went to ancient China, we find the same thing. So,
well, it's sort of like a Venn diagram, isn't it? There's a middle bit which the Romans and us would both call good and bad.
Yeah.
But then there are things like the gladiators, we would call that bad. Throwing the Christians to the lions in the Colosseum, we would say that's bad.
Yeah,
the Romans were quite happy to do that.
Yeah, that's right. We would, although judging by some of the on-screen violence, we kind of we like it so long as we actually like watching it.
Oh yeah, we like watching it. Yeah,
but just that it's not real.
But I think most people, if it was real, they wouldn't like watching it.
No, that's right.
Yeah. So there has been a change there.
Yeah, we've evolved. I mean, this is relevant to the topic of colonialism. I mean, right now, European countries that had colonies in the Caribbean or the Americas, including Britain, are subject to demands for reparations for slavery. We can get into that, but my point here is that difficult it may be to believe, slavery was a universal institution, practiced everywhere by everybody. And we have come to a point now where slavery is abhorrent. But for most of history, it's not been abhorrent. I mean, there have been good or bad kinds of slavery. There have been more humane or less humane kinds of slavery, but slavery was accepted as a fact of life, even by freed slaves in the southern United States who kept slaves of their own.
Yes, I heard that recently in one of your podcasts.
We are still evolving morally. We always do. And so if you and I regard gladiatorial contests to the death as immoral or slavery as immoral, it's only because we have inherited intuitions that our ancestors came to. In the case of slavery, around the late 1700s. Before then, you and I probably would have regarded slavery as a fact of life.
Well, we either would have been a slave or kept slaved to a certain extent.
Probably.
Yes,
yeah.
yes. It is a very interesting question of why we evolve. And also just talking on evolving, many, for want of a better word, people criticise me for using this word, but woke ideology, wouldn't their argument be that they're just evolving to the next level, to a higher level of morality?
Well, they think they are.
From a professional ethicist perspective.
Okay. So it is certainly possible that social justice warriors or wokists or progressives, whatever you want to call them, it's possible that they're right.
It is.
Yeah, it's possible. So one should never...
And they may be right in some things and wrong in other things.
Yeah. One should never dismiss new moral propositions out of hand, because it's quite... I'm a Christian, so I take it for granted that it is possible I'm wrong. I'm not a god, I'm a creature. I have limited understanding. So, yeah, it is in principle possible that what progressive focus say is right, or part of what they say is right, but we have to test it and see what are the reasons for supposing what they say is right. And we may accept bits, we may not accept other bits, and yes, so we do evolve.
So, in a sense, that's part of your project with your book, and your other project, which was Empire and Ethics.
Ethics, yes.
Yes, that's the process of testing the current discourse
Yes.
on empire, and particularly the British Empire, because no one seems to be concerned about Arab empires or the Zulu Empire,
exactly,
or the Comanches.
Comanches have an empire.
Yeah. And Aztecs, right? No one's ever marching in the street against the Aztecs.
No.
So yes, so you're in a sense you're putting these ideas to the test and questioning them. So what the Empire and Ethics project? What was that about?
So the actually, I think it was Ethics and Empire actually.
Ethics, right. I've got it written down here somewhere.
It makes no difference.
Yes, it is. You are correct.
So that was launched in 2017, and the idea there wasn't about defending the British Empire, although its critics from early on, and even to this day, think it is about defending the British Empire. It was nothing of the sort.
So you're not an apologist for the British Empire?
Well, I become a quasi-apologist later, but this project was designed to look at how people across history have viewed the empires of their day in moral terms. So we tend to regard empire as a bad thing. Our great-grandparents didn't regard it as a bad thing. What about people in ancient China who have lived under empires for centuries? Or what about medieval Arabs? Or what about the Mongols or the Mughals? Or what about the Russians in the 18th century? I mean,
the Aztecs.
Aztecs. Yeah. You go throughout history.
Well, it was the norm. So I imagine, would I be correct that they wouldn't really have thought about it too much?
They didn't.
Yeah, because it's sort of like the air. It's like the air that surrounds you.
So if you look for critiques of empire in ancient China or the medieval Muslim world, you won't find them. You'll find treatises on what makes for a good or bad emperor. But as a political form, empires were completely taken for granted. And the reason for doing this was, as it were, in a sense, to set our own assumptions in context. Because when you pay history the respect of treating it on its own terms as different, you find a different world, which then makes you ask questions as to why do we think what we think? Otherwise, we take what we think entirely for granted.
Well, a bit like, again, it's the oxygen, it's the air around us. We don't really think too much about it. Yeah.
So
and there's a line that everything around me tells me I'm right. So that's sort of generally how probably everyone thinks.
Yeah, and so being confronted with history as it really was and people as they really thought makes us ask questions. So why was it up until the late 1700s that everyone regarded slavery as a fact of life? I mean, how on earth could this be? But it's a fact. And so it provokes us to think about, among other things, about how different our situation is from their situation. To some extent, what's moral depends on circumstance. And their circumstances in the late 1700s were very different from ours. We live, you and I, we live in New Zealand and Britain in some of the most prosperous and peaceful countries in history. We're privileged. But therefore, what makes moral sense to us, certainly in terms of the ready access to violence, would not have made moral sense to someone in the past.
We have the luxury to be moral.
Yeah, we do.
In a sense.
Yeah.
And when you know, just throughout history, when things go bad, people start doing less ethical and moral things.
Well, or it's not just we luxury to be moral. We, if you think of yourself, we live in societies, touch wood, that are extraordinarily peaceful. I mean, there is violence, but it's usually not in the streets, and we can go about our lives on the assumption that we're not going to be attacked or assaulted. But if you live, even 150 years ago, in Australia or New Zealand or Canada in particular, and you're in a wild part of the country, and the state's very small. I mean, one of the big differences is that so in Britain now, the public spending is about 46% of GDP. In 1914, it was 8%. The state was much smaller, and colonial states were even smaller, which means that their power to control things was so much more limited.
Right.
And so you're on the frontier, and you come across native peoples, and you don't speak the same language, and there's no police around. Mistrust, misunderstanding, conflict, violence erupt, and it may be no one's fault, but it's the fact of the lack of a strong government makes what you do, what makes the morality of recourse to force of arms for self-defense different from our context, where we do have strong states and there are police.
Well, that's Hobbes's Leviathan, essentially, isn't it? Yeah. Yes. Well, just also, what's the difference between ethics and morals?
Not really.
I've noticed you use them interchangeably.
I do. You'll find often people will talk about in one sentence ethics and morals, as if they were different things. But I think if you asked them, they wouldn't be able to tell you.
Well, I asked the AI gods what the difference was.
Okay.
And they said morals are personal, and ethics are systematic. And so like doctors have an ethical system where that a doctor may have a moral position on abortion or whatever. But are they correct, or you just think that?
I wouldn't say that. I'd say that really the ethical and the moral are the same thing. But ethics can refer to, as it were, an intellectual discipline, an academic discipline whereby you stand back and you reflect on things. I'm an ethicist professionally. But when I talk about what's ethical or moral, I'm talking about the same thing, really.
Right. Okay, that's good. Okay, getting back to empire. So, why did regimes seek empire? Why wouldn't, like, say, the Muslims or the Zulus or whatever? Why weren't they just happy with their own little small domain?
I'd say, Michael, peoples often don't seek empire. One thing they do seek is security. So if you go back to Anglo-Saxon England, I don't know, in the 9th century, 8th, 9th century, you have the small kingdom of Wessex in England. You have a dozen other small kingdoms in what's now England. And there's no international law. There's no United Nations. So there is constant threat, constant invasion and raiding and shifting of borders. And one way in which you make yourself safe is you conquer your neighbours.
So offence is the best defence.
Offence is the best defence, and often expansion. You expand in order to be safe.
Right, it gives you more of a buffer zone as well. Yep. Right, the bigger the territory, the bigger the buffer zone. So the central part is safer.
So I think
But does that apply to the British Empire? I mean, that's an extreme example of empire.
Well, no. I think okay. Just staying with the Anglo-Saxon case. So what started off as the expansion of the Kingdom of Wessex by the 1000s had become the State of England. Right, so often old nations, certainly in Europe, began with the expansion of peoples, and what you call it, they went through an imperial expansion. where they
So imperial sort of was village to village or region to region, not continent to continent.
no, and Europe's had empires which were physically contiguous. It didn't involve crossing oceans. Right?
Well, the Austro-Hungarian Empire,
famously.
So you're sort of saying it's a reflexive response to ensure one's security.
I think that's probably a very common motive. So in North America in the 1600s, 1640s, the Iroquois Confederacy of Native American peoples, I think they'd suffered devastation by disease and they wanted to repopulate. So they expanded north and overwhelmed and displaced and absorbed the Huron people.
Do they still exist, those people, or are they genocided?
Well, I'm sure there is a descent. No, the Iroquois and the Huron.
The Huron is
no, I don't think they were exterminated. No,
right.
No. That's a one, as it were, fairly basic motive for imperial expansion, which makes you more secure. But in the case of the British Empire, that wasn't mainly the reason. One of the earliest expressions of empire was the establishment of naval bases on the east coast of North America, Francis Drake, etc., in the 1500s. Now, why did they go there? They went there partly to harry Spanish shipping. So you have little Protestant England trying to fend off big Catholic imperial Spain. So one of the ironies is the beginning of English empire in North America was anti-imperial.
Right.
But you also have, the English had also heard legends of piles of gold in the Americas, so they were out there searching for their fortunes in the same way that in the 1800s, lots of Chinese went to California, Western Australia, and Malaya in search of gold.
And New Zealand.
And New Zealand.
Yeah, Otago in New Zealand. Yeah.
Were the goldfields there?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, I didn't know.
Some of the earliest settlers.
Right. So I guess describing Englishmen as lusting for gold in the Americas sounds terribly
well, all
based and immoral. But actually, all
peoples go after gold. Again, the Incas as well.
Yeah.
Humans like gold. So there's a security imperative, but there, as we've just touched on, there is also a wealth imperative
absolutely.
as well.
So the same.
And it was at a time where international trade, getting wealthy from business, was less of a thing. So getting wealthy from exploitation was more of a thing. Would that be correct? And I'm maybe not talking about the 19th century, or the 18th century, but before that.
Well, let me just...
So pre-Dutch.
Before I get to exploitation, let me just point out making money, making profit was a major motive, not just in terms of English sailors wanting gold in the Americas, but roughly the same point, a bit later perhaps. The English East India Company was given a monopoly of trade with India. So that's when they first started establishing, by consent, trading posts on India.
By consent from
local rulers.
The Raj.
This was in the 1600s. You got various Indian rulers on the coast of India, and the company came and said, "We want to trade. Can we?"
Right. Trade is mutually beneficial.
Yep.
Right.
So before we get on to the topic of exploitation, I just want to say that there were trading posts that the peoples native to India and indeed to the northwest coast of North America, what the English brought into trade, the native peoples wanted. That's why they tolerated trade posts on their coast. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned exploitation. What were you thinking?
No, I didn't actually.
Okay.
but I suppose there's three things. There's security, there's gaining wealth, and then that maybe I should put it as a question: was there exploitation? And I suppose we need to define, what does exploitation mean?
No, well, that's my question back to you. I mean, I think people talk about exploitation as if it's obvious what it is. And I want to say, well, can we have a definition of what exploitation is? I guess exploitation is when an employer does not remunerate his employees sufficiently.
Well, slavery is exploitation.
Well, slavery. Okay, slavery.
In the extreme case.
Slavery in the extreme case where the slave has no rights and they work to death. I mean, that would be exploitation. That would be the kind of epitome of ruthless exploitation. Yes, I guess the slave plantations in the West Indies would be an example of inhumane exploitation. Yes, there was.
And I mean, I think in New Zealand's case, there was a lot of exploitation by land confiscations.
Okay.
By I mean, I'm not an expert on this, but by settlers and the Crown.
Yes.
I suppose just generalised dispossession.
That'd be theft.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So whether in New Zealand or elsewhere, were there instances of theft of land? Yes, there were. Were there instances of unjust exploitation of workers, whether slaves or not slaves? Yes, there was. But I suppose I'd say, as far as exploitation goes, there was plenty of exploitation in England at the same time. In other words, employers were exploiting workers, and who knows, people might even say that there's exploitation in New Zealand now, not of Maori, but of employers exploiting employees.
I think it's a given that some humans will exploit some other humans at any point in time.
Yeah.
It's a matter of the scale.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the transatlantic slave trade, that was on an industrial scale.
Yes.
Again, slavery was worldwide, so in a sense it's not industrial, but it's very common.
Yeah.
But I suppose, I mean, that's getting back to ethics. In a sense, over time, we've been lucky enough to experience the reduction in the exploitation. I mean, it'll never go. Just like sin will never go in talking in Christian terms.
Yeah.
But it's really a matter of reducing it to its smallest number.
Yeah. So you and I, we are the beneficiaries of the endeavours of people in the past in our countries who have fought against, let's say, economic exploitation and fought for the rights of native peoples and of labourers. So as far as social and economic justice goes, we're in far better shape than we were a century ago, 2 centuries ago. But those things had to be fought for. And I think one of the things that our Western liberal societies can be praised for is that we have been more successful than other countries in enshrining rights and helping to moderate the inequalities between those with power and wealth and those without. Now, when the struggle goes on, but at least we recognise there should be a struggle, and over time things have got the inequalities have narrowed.
Well, it's which place do you want to be? It's no accident that most of the world's immigration is from non-Western countries to Western countries. Yes. I think the United States has the greatest influx of immigrants of any country.
Yes.
And that's there's no accident. People vote with their feet.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah. Just going back to empire. When what was the first empire? Do we know that?
The very first. I don't know. I mean, certainly sure. I'm aware of. I mean, there may have been. I mean, I think of the Mesopotamian empires, the Assyrian, Babylonian empires. of several thousand years BC. There might actually have been an empire in the Indus Valley in the Indian subcontinent earlier than that.
That's about 3,000 BC.
4,000 BC.
Yeah. And the Egyptians, were they an empire, or were they just
No,
Egyptian?
they were. They controlled territory in what's now Israel and further north than that, and south.
So essentially, it's as old as civilization.
Yes,
as soon as there's a correlation between the process of civilization and empire.
Yeah, there is.
Right.
There is.
Right. And fast forwarding to today, do we have empires now?
Yes, we certainly do. I mean, ironically, although it poses as anti-colonial, China is an empire, certainly in terms of its control over Tibet.
Right.
And it's aggressively so insofar as the claims it makes on Taiwan. And I imagine the Uyghur people probably regard the behavior of Chinese as a bad case of colonialism.
I've done 2 podcasts on the Uyghurs, and
so
it ain't fun. And I'm sure they feel they were under an empire.
And the same, I mean, obviously, Russia's behavior toward Ukraine is aggressively imperial.
So is the West imperial? So is America imperial? And it's got hundreds, and I think about 1,000 bases around the world, or something ridiculous like that.
Yeah. So America exercises worldwide power, military and economic. Is it an empire? Well, if empire sometimes is informal, I mean, there's this notion of informal empire, which indeed the British exercise. So empire doesn't always consist of control of territory. It can consist of financial domination.
Control of trade, essentially.
Control of trade, control of finance, and the British, I think it's said that the British had a kind of informal empire in Latin America in the 19th century or the 20th century, just because of a lot of the investment for the development of infrastructure in Latin America came from London. So again, we need to be, as it were, discriminate in what we mean by empire, because it can take different forms. So America has some, let's say, it has some of the attributes of empire. What it doesn't have, at least since it gave up ruling the Philippines, and there were a few other bits of territory it acquired in the late 19th century, which were, as it were, classically imperial. It's given up that, although, of course, the whole westward expansion of European colonists after the Revolutionary War, the colonization of the western part of North America, was an imperial act.
Yes, well, New Mexico.
Yeah,
I think
So it says America.
Big Texas was Mexico. Used to belong to,
So America is an empire. But it doesn't.
Currently not seeking to expand.
It doesn't have overseas territories in the way European empires had. Many of them now.
But just by its domination and trade, and the fact that the US dollar is a reserve currency, it has a quasi-imperial mode to it. Do we need empires? I mean, we had Pax Romana, we had Pax Britannia. Now we've hopefully got, well, I'm all for Pax Americana, and long may it continue. Do we need this? You have a Leviathan within a state, but do you need a global Leviathan to keep peace?
Well, I'd be against a global Leviathan because all absolute power tends toward tyranny, and if you have only one center of power globally, there's no possibility of a center of resistance. So I'd say I don't want a global government.
I actually didn't ask you what you wanted.
No, okay.
and I'm not asking about government.
Okay.
I'm actually asking about do we need a Leviathan in terms of like for example the Americans rule the seas. The American Navy ensures the free flow of trade. Now if that goes, there'll be significant consequences. And you can say the same applied to the British Navy,
Yep.
and also in relation to the British Navy stopping the slave trade.
Yep.
I've heard you say, and I've heard it many times, that at least 30% of the Navy was dedicated to stopping the slave trade.
Yep.
So it had a sort of a policing function.
Yeah. Yeah. So, okay, so since I don't think, I mean, I regard international rivalry as a fact of life. I don't think we're ever going to have a world government. And we're going to have some nations that are more powerful than others. Some will dominate, some will be dominated. The only question is whether those with superior power can learn to use their power justly. And I think on the whole, the United States has used its superior power justly, and faced with the question of whether I prefer to be in a world ruled by the Communist Party of China, or even Donald Trump's Washington. I take Washington. So I think that being dominated is a fact of life.
Why is that? What would be wrong with a China-dominated world?
Oh, so simply in terms of its promotion of autocratic, non-democratic government that is not held to accountable, and where the rights of individuals are not respected. Therefore, because America still is a more or less liberal democracy, where the rights of the individuals are respected certainly better than most other parts of the world, I want that system to dominate, because it's a system in my country and in yours. So the liberal democracies have interests in common, and I want our political organisation at least to be secure, perhaps even to dominate, lest it be dominated and destroyed.
What is the difference between empire and colonialism? Are they the same thing, or the colonisation follows from empire?
The latter, Michael. So empire is the basic form. Empire is where one people expands and dominates other peoples. But as we mentioned, the Austro-Hungarian Empire existed in the central landmass of Europe. And all its bits were physically contiguous. Well, not entirely, but roughly contiguous.
Yeah. It was big.
Yeah. But colonies originally were when ancient Carthaginians or ancient Greeks or ancient Romans sailed across the Mediterranean to foreign parts and established a colony.
Doesn't it mean the origin of the word? Doesn't it mean farmer? Do you
Colonia, I don't know.
I may be making this up, but I think I read that not quite a few years ago.
It could be. I mean, it's
so it's basically when the invading troops are in the what's the word?
In the colony.
Barracks.
Barracks.
Yeah. I'm sorry. And then at some point, they integrate with the local population. They actually become farmers.
Oh well, it wasn't quite like that. It was more colonies were. They were populated by retired soldiers.
Yes.
Who were farmers.
Yes.
But of course, they also knew how to defend themselves.
Yes.
So that they would set up enclaves on the coast of Sicily or North Africa or Spain, and obviously create defensive fortifications, but also set about
but they would have also intermarried as well.
Yeah, in due course.
Yeah.
So colonies are an expression of imperial expansion, usually involving the crossing of water. So when the Phoenicians, if this is true, when the Phoenicians sailed off and landed on the coast of North Africa and built Carthage was a colony, in the same way that when the Brits sailed to Australia and New Zealand and established ports or settlements, those were colonies.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I have Māori relations. If I were them, if I was Māori, should I view British colonisation of New Zealand as a good thing, a bad thing, or a combination of the two?
Well, if your Maori relatives were to ask me, I'd say the last. So I'm not an expert on New Zealand history.
But just in
Michael,
terms in general.
I've read something about it. So I'm perfectly willing to concede, and I think it's true that in the later 1800s, injustices were done to Maori peoples. The land was taken that shouldn't have been taken. And the question of making that right is an important question.
You mean redressing that wrong in the present day?
Yeah. So that's a preface of what I want to say, but I want to say, yes, if wrong was done, it should be righted. How you right it, how you make it good is sometimes a difficult question, because you can't simply reverse history. But let that be taken for granted. If wrongs were done, if land was stolen, for example, then that should be put right. That said, I believe it's true that before the Maori chiefs approached London and invited some kind of imperial intervention in the late 1830s, Christian missionaries had come to New Zealand, and Maori, I believe, were largely Christianized or heavily Christianized even in the 1830s.
To be clear, of their own free will? Was it forced on them, or?
Well, okay. And until someone shows me otherwise, since there was no colonial authority in New Zealand in the 1830s at all, and so all there were, I think, were sealers and maybe some traders, maybe some settlers and missionaries.
Yeah.
I can't see how the missionaries could possibly have forced.
The missionaries didn't have guns.
Did not have guns.
They didn't have guns.
Okay.
That's a question. Yeah.
But
they were in a military force.
They weren't a military force. They were not. Well, they may have had guns, but even if they had, the Maori were a very warlike people. So it seems to me incredible, the idea that Christian missionaries forced Christianity down the throats of Maori at the end of a barrel. It seems to me entirely incredible. But whether it's true or not is a matter of fact. But from what I've read, that's not the case. And the Christianization of the Maori had from my point of view, probably for yours, and probably from the point of view of many contemporary Maori, had the benefit of, I think, helping to suppress the musket wars between Maori peoples, which were devastating Maori populations.
Yeah, it was more devastating for the Maori population than the wars between the British and
Is that right? Right.
Well, according to a book called The Musket Wars, which seems to be one of the canonical books on the...
Well, I certainly heard the effects were really devastating.
It was extreme. I mean, I've read The Musket Wars, and I couldn't get... I got halfway and I couldn't get through anymore, because it was so brutal what their tribe would do to each other. And I'm a bit of a softie. I'm not good on reading brutal stuff.
There's only so much brutal stuff one needs to expose oneself to.
Yes. It was very extreme.
But my understanding is that the missionaries did have some effect in helping to terminate the wars, and also, if I'm not mistaken, slavery was practiced among Maori peoples.
Slavery and cannibalism.
Yeah. So, I mean, just on this point of the universality of slavery, one reason that slavery was universal was actually very, very simple. In the past, if my people conquer your people, so I end up with several hundred young, defeated people of yours on my hands, and I don't have a prison system. I can't afford a prison system. What am I going to do with you? If I let you go, you're going to come back and attack me tomorrow. So I slaughter you. Or I enslave you. So slavery was very common because it's what you did with defeated enemies.
Yes. Well, the word slave, as I understand it, actually comes from the word Slav. So when the Romans defeated the Slavs.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah, I think something like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, one thing I'd say is British Empire, in an informal sense, arrived with the missionaries. I mean, there wasn't colonial government, but this was the influence of, as it were, one of the effects of the worldwide influence of the expansion of British peoples, which was the expansion of, which was the arrival of Christian missionaries, which had, as I understand it, a number of beneficial effects for Maori people. And then the other thing I'd say is, notwithstanding the conflicts, sometimes violent, over what the word sovereignty meant in the Treaty of Waitangi, and how much, who has what power and by what authority, and notwithstanding the unjustified theft of land, the truth is that all of New Zealand's peoples now, whether they're Maori or European or they come from Asia, you get to live in one of the most prosperous and liberal countries on earth now. And it's not and if you've had to struggle with the issue of historic injustices like Australia, like Canada.
How do you account for the indigenous populations of, I'm just trying to, whether I use the word all or not, let's just use the word all, of all British colonial countries. How do you account for the fact that the indigenous people now do so poorly relative to everyone else in terms of socioeconomic status? I mean, in New Zealand men's prison, 50% of the population are Māori men.
Okay.
If you look at the stats of what Māori individuals own relative to everyone else, it's just a very small fraction of the wealth of the country. Those are I suppose the what's the term? Is it's I'll think of it as we talk.
Well, what's the idea?
No. There is a term which has been referred to, and it's not in my head. It'll come.
It's not intergenerational trauma.
Thank you, intergenerational trauma. I mean, I've had a very smart conversation, with a very smart Asian psychologist, and he was telling me about treating Maori children who've got intergenerational trauma. Now. So it's one thing to say that, yes, aren't we all lucky to live in these sort of fantastic modern worlds? But if you're at the bottom of the socioeconomic pile, and your family suffers from violence, your father's in prison, you don't have any education, it's hard for you to get a job. Yeah, so how do we account for that, or how do we reckon with that?
Yeah. So I don't know enough about the New Zealand case.
But it applies to the Aborigines. It probably applies to the indigenous North Americans.
Canadians. Yeah. So what some will claim is that this is the result of trauma caused by colonization. And my response to that is, well, it might be, but we need more than an assertion of a causal connection, because colonization happened quite a long time ago, and a lot's intervened since then. Now, I can't talk about New Zealand because I don't know enough about the facts, but in Australia and Canada, I understand, there is often social dysfunction among Aboriginal and Native Canadian communities. But the social dysfunction is mainly in remote communities. There are lots of people with Aboriginal blood in Australia, lots of Native Canadians who are more or less thoroughly integrated into Western urban society, and often mixed blood. And my understanding is that in terms of outcomes, they're doing as well or almost as well or increasingly as well as any other member of society. So the question is the cause the fact of colonization 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, or are the causes more proximate?
Or is it something I never heard talked about? The indigenous people had to make an extreme change from a pre-scientific, pre-industrial, and essentially a Stone Age communities to a modern community in a blink of an eye. All other, like in Europe, it had been a very gradual process, and a very slow process. Too slow. So that change, it's if you talk about, say, your genealogy, it'd be interesting to know, the professional status of from your genealogy or my genealogy, but then to go from literally someone whose work is to find food and hunt and care in a non-modern system to a modern system. That must be an enormous jump.
No, I agree, and I think
and as well, not only that, but then to be dispossessed, and then to have your culture completely dominated and, in a sense, I mean, not eradicated, but severely diminished.
So I agree. I think the impact of European modernity on these places was shocking. Because of the cultural disparity. Although the Maori were, in a sense, more organised and more developed than the Aboriginals.
Well, they were highly sophisticated. I mean, they were trading.
Exactly.
They were trading produce with Australia, with Sydney.
So in a sense, the Maori were exceptionally, in terms of relative to the Aboriginals in Australia, relative to Native American peoples, the Maori were better advantaged.
They're highly sophisticated, and both in war as well.
So yes, the impact was shocking. My view is the impact was inevitable. Modernity was coming.
Expand on that.
Well, because since Europeans had developed ocean-going vessels, or sooner or later, some Europeans or other were pitching up on the coasts of New Zealand. In fact, the reason that the British government got involved with New Zealand officially and reluctantly was because European sealers and traders were already pitching up.
And American as well. French.
So modernity was coming, and and it was bound to be shocking, given the cultural distinction.
It's sort of a hard thing to say, but I think it's good to say it. Who would you be if you were Māori? Would you be rather colonised by the English, the French, the Americans, the Chinese, the Japanese? I think I know which one I'd pick.
That was the
and again, that's not to make an excuse for all the terrible things that have happened.
No, it isn't. It isn't. So I want to introduce into our thinking about these things. Sometimes what happened was unjust. Sometimes what happened was tragic. And I think it was the large element of tragedy about the encounter of these two peoples, Europeans and Maori, the huge cultural gap was bound to be shocking, and sometimes good intentions went awry and the effects were tragic. Sometimes bad intentions expressed themselves in various forms of injustice.
And also, if I can add to that, sometimes there's things that no one would ever have thought of, which was disease.
No, indeed.
I mean, how would the Europeans know that they were going to, the diseases that brought would have obliterated?
Can we just get back onto the issue of the present woes and disadvantages of Indigenous peoples? Again, I don't know the New Zealand case well enough, but in Canada and Australia, my sense is some descendants of Aboriginal and Native American people are doing better than others, which suggests that which suggests that the dysfunction of some Native communities is not straightforwardly a function of colonization. It's approximately, more nearly, a function of other things. And that leads you to look at what are the conditions on reserves in Canada. Does the fact that they're remote mean that people are disadvantaged?
Well, all remote communities are poor. The Appalachians.
That's true.
Yeah.
But there's one more thing. There is an anthropologist in Australia called Peter Sutton, who spent time living among the Wik people of northern Queensland. And he wrote a book called The Politics of Suffering. And from the book you'll glean that he considers himself to be a man of the left. But he says there, he talks about the campaigns for native title, Aboriginal title, and the return of land and territory, and various other, as it were, political campaigns for, in Australia, a special voice to Parliament, that kind of thing. And he says, well, maybe those things are right, and maybe they should be promoted. But his main point is they're not actually addressing the problems on the ground at all.
Yes, well, that's what I find in discussions in New Zealand. It's like, there's a problem, what's the cause? Colonization. Yeah. There's another problem, what's the cause? Colonization. It's getting to the point where it's actually laughable, because there's this sort of universal acid that's going to solve everything, and it's, the reason for it is a colonization, which is tragic, because it's actually missing the point. It's saying, what are the problems? Let's address those problems. And the problem is we can't actually do anything about the fact that some people in the past did other things to other people in the past, and those people may or may not be related to us. Yeah.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
The canter of imaginary guilt. Who said that? And what was he talking about? And what does canter mean?
Canker.
Oh, canker. Sorry.
Canker. Good question. I think of it as being equivalent to cancer.
Yes.
The cancer. It's not quite the same thing, but it's a kind of disease. You've noticed I like that phrase a lot. The canker of imaginary guilt.
It's very poetic.
The person who coined that phrase was a Baghdad-born Jewish London-based historian called Eli Kaduri, who in 1976 wrote a book called The Anglo-Arab Labyrinth. And in that book, he discusses in mind-bending detail whether or not the British had promised the Arabs during the First World War that Palestine would be part of an Arab state, and whether the British had therefore betrayed the Arabs in allowing Zionist immigration into Palestine after the First World War. And Kaduri concludes, and I think he's correct, that the British had made no promise to the Arabs that Palestine would be part of an Arab state. The British did actually help to support the creation of two Arab states, one in Jordan, one in Iraq, but not in Palestine. But Kaduri wrote this book in 1976 because, in his view, the British Foreign Office had come to believe after the First World War that the British had indeed betrayed the Arabs, and this was distorting British foreign policy. The imaginary guilt over the past was distorting British foreign policy.
Right.
And so one of the main reasons I wrote my book on colonialism, Michael, was because I feared that a misreading of our imperial past, whether in Britain or New Zealand, Australia or Canada, was leading to misplaced guilt and distorting public and foreign policy. So I wanted to get the history straight. So let's be guilty about things we deserve to be guilty about. But first of all, as you rightly said, what someone's ancestors did 200 years ago, 150 years ago, neither you nor I should feel guilty about, because we didn't do it. Now, there may be effects we are responsible for dealing with now, but as for the past, who was guilty, how far they were guilty,
And how far do we go back? Do we go back to the Etruscans?
Well, no, there's no end, really. So I wanted to, and I still think we certainly in Britain, our elites are indulging in a lot of misplaced guilt, and I think it needs to stop.
Well, I think that's a good place for us to stop as well. As I say to so many of my guests, I could go on all day. Well, not go on, I could discuss with you all day on this fascinating topic. It's been a great honour to be able to discuss this with you, and thank you very much.
Thanks, Michael. I'm really glad to have a chance to talk about these things and particularly reflect on your own home of New Zealand. I've learned a lot.
Right, well, thank you. To help the Shape of Dialogue grow, please subscribe, like and comment and share it to all and sundry. Many thanks.